At this time, I'd like to introduce our presenter. Rebecca Peterson is Product Marketing Manager for System Sensor. Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you, David. First, I want to thank everyone on the phone for taking time out of your busy days to attend this webinar. The low frequency requirement is a new and important code that went into effect in January. It has impacted the sleeping space requirements for states and regions that are following the 2010 or 2013 edition of NFPA 72. Many of you may have sat in our previous webinar, Low Frequency Audible Alarm Requirements, presented by Richard Roberts, our Industry Affairs Manager for Honeywell Life Safety. In that webinar, Richard covered the background information on the origin of the low frequency requirements. He also covered the specific code sections that were impacted, as well as the impact to the International Building Code and International Fire Code. In case you did not get a chance to attend that webinar, we do have an archived version on our website under our training center. I strongly suggest you watch it in case you want to know more about the origin of the low frequency requirements and the specific sections of the codes that were impacted. Now, we launched our low frequency product line last June, and since then we have received many questions about the products. How are they different from a mini horn or a horn only, as well as how to integrate them with your non-low frequency products, and as well as a bunch of other questions. So over the next 45 minutes, I will be going into more details on the product requirements for low frequency notification appliances. First, I want to go over what UL requires for products to be listed as low-frequency appliances. Second, I will give you an overview of our System Sensor low-frequency product offering. Third, I want to go over some design considerations. Because the low-frequency products are different from a traditional mini horn or horn product, these differences can impact your designs and your overall bill of material cost. Lastly, I want to go over some system applications for the low-frequency devices. Now, this is going to be a little bit of a recap from Richard's webinar, which covered the impact to the International Building Code and Fire Code, but I feel that it's important enough to cover again. Now, throughout the webinar, I will try to answer as many of the questions that we have received within the content. But in case I missed anything, please feel free to enter them in during the webinar, and I will try to answer as many as I can at the end. Okay, let's get started. So first up, I want to go over the UL requirements for low-frequency notification appliances. Now, the UL product standard for notification appliances is ANSI UL 464, which is the standard for audible and signaling appliances. These requirements cover electrically and electronically operated bells, buzzers, horns, and similar audible devices. This is the standard that our System Sensor mini horns and horn strobes, as well as our new low-frequency products, are listed to. Now, section in ANSI UL 464, in particular section 24.1, which is the section that is part of the audibility requirements for notification appliances, was impacted. They added section 24.3 that lists the criteria for a low-frequency signal format. Now, this requirement went into effect on April of 2012, which was approximately 3 years after the low-frequency requirements were published in the 2010 edition of NFPA 72. Now, the reason for the gap is that it took UL and the Standards Committee time to develop test methods to ensure they were aligned with the results of Dr. Dorothy Brooks' study. Now, the results of the study concluded that a square wave tone centered around 520 Hz was more effective at waking sleeping individuals, including those that have mild to severe hearing loss or those that may be under influence of alcohol or drugs. Now, section 24.3.2 defines the harmonic profile that the devices need to comply with in order to be listed as low-frequency notification appliances. The devices shall produce their acoustic signal having a fundamental frequency of 520 Hz plus or minus 10% at its F1 or that first harmonic profile. They're then going to measure the subsequent odd harmonics. The third harmonic has to be centered around 1560 Hz. The fifth harmonic has to be centered around 2600 Hz, and the seventh harmonic has to be centered around 3640 Hz. All of these have a plus or minus 10% tolerance. They're going to evaluate them using a fast Fourier transform analysis, which is just a measurement method for audio signals. Now, the reason for the evaluation of only the odd harmonics is because this is what defines that square wave tone. Now, square waves require more energy, and by analyzing just the odd harmonics, what UL is doing is ensuring that there is equivalent energy throughout the signal. Now what they're going to do is take a 30-second sampling using a spectrum analysis and measure the dB output at each of these odd harmonics. They're going to do this testing in a reverberant room. So what they're looking for from that F1 or that first harmonic is that it has to have its maximum dB output around the 520 Hertz. Then they're going to look at that third harmonic, and it has to be at least 5 dB from that highest peak of that F1 harmonic, but no less than 20 dB of that F1, and it has to be centered around 1560 Hertz. Then they're going to look at the fifth harmonic, and it has to be at least 5 dB from the highest peak of that F1 harmonic, but no less than 30 dB of that F1 harmonic, and it has to be centered around 2600 Hertz. And lastly, they're going to look at the seventh harmonic, which has to be at least 5 dB of the highest peak of that F1 harmonic, but no less than 50 dB of that F1 harmonic, and it has to be centered around 3640 Hertz. Now this is a very specific profile that has to be met in order to have a notification appliance listed as a low-frequency notification appliance. Now, in an effort to try to make this a little bit more understandable, I want to walk you through our low-frequency signal as it was measured by UL to section 24.3. So as you can see here, the first octave, that F1, is centered around 520 Hertz, and it has its highest dB output peak. Then I'll move over to the third harmonic, which is centered around 1560 Hertz, and it's at least 5 dB lower than that first F1 harmonic, but no less than 20 dB from that F1. Now the fifth harmonic is centered around 2600 Hertz, and it is at least 5 dB lower than the first F1 harmonic, but no lower than 30 dB of that F1 harmonic. And lastly, the seventh harmonic is at least 5 dB lower than that first F1 harmonic, but no lower than 50 dB, and it's centered around 3640 Hertz. Now, section 24.3 is just one of the requirements to be listed as a low-frequency notification appliances. These products still have to conform to the rest of the product performance requirements for notification appliances, such as audibility, corrosion, impact, and a slew of other tests. One of the additional listing requirements is that they have to comply with the marking requirements. Since this is the first time that NFPA 72 code has required a specific frequency for a notification appliance, UL and the Standards Committee decided to require a permanent marking on the housing in order to distinguish these products from non-low frequency products. For Section 39 of ANSI UL 464, products listed to the low frequency requirements as defined per Section 24.1 must have a permanent marking on the housing that states low frequency alarm. UL will also allow low-frequency sounder as an acceptable equivalent. Now, I do also want to make you aware that there are additional product standards that also have low-frequency requirements, and that's for devices that have an audible component in their devices. So the first standard is ANSI UL 217, and this is the standard for single and multiple station smoke alarms. Now these are your typical residential smoke alarms that can either be 110 volt AC or battery operated. Next is ANSI UL 268, which is the standard for smoke detectors that are connected to fire alarm systems. These devices get their power from a fire alarm panel, and they can be either conventional or intelligent form. The next standard is ANSI UL 2034, which is the standard for single and multiple station carbon monoxide alarms. So these are your residential carbon monoxide alarms that can be either plug-in or battery operated. And lastly is ANSI UL 2075, which is the standard for gas and vapor detectors and sensors. And this is the standard that carbon monoxide detectors are listed to. Now, the audible component of these products are only listed for local notification, which just means that they cannot produce a general evacuation. If products wish to do that, then they need to have a complementary listed to ANSI UL 464. Now, the signal format is the same for these products as ANSI 464, but the test method is slightly different. When UL is doing their testing, they are looking for products that are listed to ANSI UL 464. They have to meet a minimum dB output of 75 dB at their temporal 3-tone in a reverberant room measured at 10 feet. While products that fall within these other product standards, they have to meet a minimum of 85 dB in a reverberant room in a continuous tone. And this produces about a 4 dB difference in essence less for a 464 product. Then there's also a correction factor that is evaluated where they're converting the sound power in the reverberant room to measure the sound power as a conversion to sound pressure level, which yields about a 6 dB difference. So if you add these 2 dB differences apart, you're going to see about a 10 dB difference less in a 464 product from a 268 or 2075 product. Now, one of the questions that I have been asked is, how do you know what products do and do not comply with the low frequency requirements? Now, the reason that people are asking this question is that there are products that have been out in the market for many years that operate and are listed to a wider frequency range. They actually list a specific frequency range, and some go as low as 400 hertz. So one would think, hey, 520 hertz is greater than 400 hertz, so it should comply. But as a reminder, the low frequency code requirements were published in the 2010 edition of NFPA 72 in 2009, and the ANSI UL 464 product standard was updated in April of 2012. Products that were available in the market before April of 2012 would need to go back to UL and be evaluated per section 24.3 in order to be listed as a low frequency appliance. They would also have to comply with the marking requirements that were added to ANSI UL 464. But another way to verify is to check the UL online certifications directory. UL has a really nice directory if you just go under ul.com, and in the bottom right-hand section there's a link that says UL online certifications directory. When you go in there, you can actually type in the model number of the manufacturer you wish to check, or you can actually put in the company's name. And I'm just showing you a snapshot of our listing card, and as you can see there, our products are listed as 520 Hertz low frequency sounders and 520 Hertz low frequency sounder strobes. As more products listed to these requirements will be available in the market, you should see consistency in the listing cards. Okay, David, it's time for poll question number 1.
Yes, it is, Rebecca. Thank you. So we are launching poll question number 1. So if you could, those of you that may be multitasking, doing something else on your screen, come back and answer this. We'd love to get your response to these poll questions. There's 2 of them during the presentation and a 3rd one at the end. So the first poll question is, were you aware of the low frequency requirements prior to this webinar? So it's been in the code, it's been announced in the code 3+ years ago, and it's been out in the market here for 5+ months. So if you could, take an opportunity here to vote yes or no, simple one for you. Rebecca, we do have a couple questions that have posted. By the way, we do encourage questions. Use that question box on your GoToWebinar control panel and type it in if you see something that you'd like to ask a question about or want to ask Rebecca a question regarding low frequency, please post it there. So Rebecca, the first one is they really don't know about low frequency, what it sounds like. So do we have an example of it or a WAV file that we can share with them? How could we do that?
So on our website, under systemsensor.com, if you go /LF, we have, it's our product page to our low frequency products. Over to the right-hand section, there's a lot of reference information. And in the bottom, we have the actual sound files. So if you want to hear what a 3 kilohertz tone sounds like, which is what the basis of the study was, and then you can listen to the new 520 hertz low frequency tone so you can hear what that sounds like. And we have it in the temporal 3 pattern.
Wonderful. Good. So visit systemsensor.com, click on AV, click on low frequency, and you'll get to the same spot. So good. Thank you. Second question here. We'll answer a couple of questions in these first couple of poll questions and then get to hopefully almost everyone else at the end. But second question posted here, what frequency are existing mini horns and horn-only products? So let me say that again here maybe more clearly. At what frequency do our existing mini horns and horn-only products operate at?
That's a good question. So our mini horn uses a 3 kilohertz tone, so it's optimized for that frequency. And our SpectrAlert Advanced HR or our P2Rs, they actually are using a hopping frequency. So they're hopping between 2 kilohertz and 4 kilohertz, so both in that higher frequency range. And that's why when you look at the specifications between the products, the HR and P2Rs have a higher dB output because they're hopping around a frequency range.
Okay, very good. And Rebecca, I'm sharing the poll results now. I will share these with everyone that's viewing us today. So were you aware of the requirements prior to this webinar? It looks like almost 70%, 68% have said yes, but 32% no. So you're in the right place. Those that have indicated no, we're going to tell you a lot about it, and hopefully we'll maybe fill in some gaps for those that may have heard of this requirement previously. Rebecca, I'm going to take that poll question down, and we'll be back to your presentation.
Okay, well, now that I gave you a good background into the UL product requirements, I want to give you an overview of our system sensor 520 Hz low frequency product offering. Now, before we started developing our product, we looked at all of our available options to see how we could comply. So we first looked at our standard piezo element, and this is something that we use in our horns and in our mini horns. Now, the nice thing about this piezo element is that a very efficient component, and it draws very little energy. One of its other benefits is that it's very small, and so it can fit into many smaller housing designs. But unfortunately, it's designed for optimal efficiency around 3 kilohertz, and once we tried to drive a square wave tone through it, we could not meet the necessary harmonic profile. So we had to eliminate it from our selection process. So next, we focused our efforts on a traditional 4-inch speaker element. Now, we did a lot of customer interviews when we were designing the 520 Hz product, and we consistently heard that they did not want to meet the low frequency requirements using a voice system. They just did not like the idea of now having to bring in an amplifier, and if you're talking about a speaker strobe solution, now you're running more wires, which really adds a lot of cost to the system. So what we heard from our customers is that they really wanted to meet this requirement with a 2-wire product solution, and they wanted something very similar to our traditional horns and horn strobes. So we went back to the drawing board, and we then developed a custom 2-inch speaker that we could fit into a very similar size housing style as our horn and horn strobes. So our 520 Hz low frequency product uses a specific 2-inch custom designed speaker element that is designed to resonate at 520 Hz and fully comply with the ANSI UL 464 requirements. It produces its maximum sound output and provides an efficient circuit design that can fit in that smaller housing design. Our product line consists of a 2-wire low-frequency sounder and a 2-wire low-frequency sounder strobes. Because they operate on just 2 wires, you can easily integrate them into any new or existing fire alarm or emergency communication system. Our products are available in both red and white, and they are of the wall mount style, but are dual listed for both wall and ceiling mount installations. So if you need to, you can use the rectangular product on the ceiling. We are fully listed for that feature. They offer all of the same great features as our entire SpectrAlert Advanced product line, which includes a plug-in design that minimizes costly ground faults, a shorting spring feature that allows you to test for wiring integrity before system commissioning, and it has a universal mounting plate so you can mount these devices to a wide variety of electrical back boxes. These devices do come with our system sensor synchronization protocol, so you can combine them on the same line with our traditional mini horns, and horn strobes, and they will function just the same fashion in terms of the temporal pattern. They are the first UL-listed 520 Hz low-frequency notification appliances on the market, and they are also FM and CSFM approved. Our 520 Hz low-frequency sounders come with 3 selectable tones, temporal 3, continuous, and coded. Now, many ask us what a coded tone is, and it's just a tone that can be created by the fire alarm control panel or from a power supply. So you can, in essence, create your own custom tones, such as temporal 4. Our sounder-only versions are compatible with both 12 and 24-volt DC and full-wave rectified systems. The model numbers are HR-LF and HW-LF. Our 520 Hz low-frequency sounder strobes incorporates a xenon strobe into our devices. The candela range is of our high candela offering, which includes 135, 150, 177, and 185 candela, which is field selectable. These come with just 2 selectable tones, temporal, 3, and continuous, and are compatible only with 24-volt DC and full-wave rectified systems. The model numbers are P2RH-LF and P2WH-LF. Now, many have asked us why we do not offer a standard candela model. Now, remember that per the code for the sleeping space requirements, where a strobe is required, the minimum candela for a wall is 110 candela, and for a ceiling, the minimum is 177 candela. Now, when we asked many of our customers, they felt that by offering just the high candela range model, they could use that product for both wall and ceiling, since we do have that dual listing capability. And this was easier for them because they didn't want to have to manage additional SKUs. Now, these products were released last June and are available through distribution. Now I would like to walk you through some design considerations, because as I stated earlier, the specifications of these products are different from your traditional mini horn or 2-wire horn and horn strobes. Now, just as a reminder, the requirements were added only to the sleeping space requirements for Chapter 18 as well as Chapter 29 of the 2010 or 2013 edition of NFPA 72. Chapter 18 requires them in every sleeping space for a protected premise fire alarm system. Chapter 29 only requires them in the sleeping rooms for those that have classified as having mild to severe hearing loss for household fire alarm systems. Now, before this change went into effect, most were probably using mini horns or a horn-only product in the sleeping spaces. As I mentioned before, because most the mini horns and the horns use a piezo element, those draw a really little amount of energy. With the new low frequency requirement, at least for our product solution, we found that the best way to meet this requirement was to utilize a speaker element. Speakers by nature draw more energy. Compound that with the fact that you have to drive a square wave signal format through it, that even adds more energy consumption. So when you start looking at the specification sheets of our low frequency products versus your traditional mini horn or horn, do be aware that these do draw more current, which then is going to impact the amount of power supplies that you may need in order to meet the sleeping space requirements. Now, since we also utilize a speaker element, these products do cost more than a mini horn or a traditional horn-only product. So I want to make you aware of these two things, because as you're designing your system, and maybe you're not needing to comply with the requirement today, but maybe in a few years, I don't want you to be surprised when your cost is greatly impacted. Now, another question that I get a lot is, how do I do local versus general evacuation with low-frequency notification appliances? Now, in most sleeping spaces, especially in your R1 and R2 occupancies, most installers and designers want to provide local notification before general evacuation. This is especially important if you're talking about spaces where you might have a microwave in that sleeping space and maybe someone burnt some popcorn, or let's say someone is smoking in the room. You don't want to evacuate the entire building because someone is being careless. Now, given that many in the industry have not released products that can give you just that low-frequency local notification, what we recommend is that you can utilize a control module that can be interconnected with our low-frequency devices to provide that local and general occupant notification. Now, this, of course, can add up to a lot of control modules if you wish to do this for every sleeping room. So what we recommend is that you group a number of rooms per control module to make it a little bit more economical. Now, the amount of devices that you can connect to the control module is really going to depend on the current draw of the product you're wishing to use, whether you're going to use a low-frequency sounder or if you're using the low-frequency sounder strobe. Now, I do want to make you aware that we will be coming out with a low-frequency sounder base before the end of the year that will provide a local and general evacuation solution. Now, the other question that I get is about voice evacuation requirements. Now, for high-rise hotel spaces, the requirement is that if you have a protected premise fire alarm system, those do require voice solution in the sleeping spaces. So the question that I receive is, can you comply with the low-frequency requirements using a voice system? And the answer is yes, you can use a voice system, but it requires system compatibility, meaning that the panel, the amplifier, the specific low-frequency sound file that you're wishing to use, and the manufacturer's speakers that you wish to use have to comply with the low-frequency requirements as defined per Section 24.3 of ANSI UL 464, as well as the audibility requirements. Now this requirement came a bit late in the game. Now as we had launched our product, we started to get many questions about the voice system requirements. And we went back to UL because we could not find anything that was published in our speaker standard, which is the ANSI UL 1480. Now their response was that system compatibility is required because speakers are really just passive devices, meaning they are just turning on and off. And yes, you can adjust the volume setting by adjusting the tap setting, but they're really relying on the signal that is generated either by the amplifier or by a program that is then fed into the amplifier and through the panel and then distributed down to the speakers. All of these processes are going to impact that signal. As it went in, it will not look the same as when it comes out of the speaker. So what UL is requiring is an evaluation and a control of these components so that they can ensure that they comply with the requirements just as their standalone low-frequency sounders do. Now many are confused by this requirement because they see on our data sheet and some of the amplifier data sheet that they are rated between 400 to 4,000 hertz. And once again, you would say to yourself, well, you know, 520 hertz falls within that range, so you would think it's fine. But what UL does when they're evaluating amplifiers to ANSI UL 1711 is that they're only evaluating them across an average of their listed frequency range. So for example, if I have an amplifier and I want to get it listed from, let's say, 600 to 2,000 hertz, all of the performance tests that UL will do to ANSI UL 1711 will be performed as an average across that frequency range. UL is not going to go in and test any set specific frequency within that range. And as I stated a few times earlier, the low frequency requirement is not just about the 520 hertz frequency, but also that it has to have a square wave profile. So these two things in conjunction need to be evaluated to ensure compliance with the code. Now to determine if system compatibility has been achieved, we suggest that you check with your amplifier or panel manufacturer for a status update. Now in the interim, until compatibility is established, what you may be required to do is utilize our low frequency sounder to meet the low frequency requirements, and then you can utilize your speakers for your voice messaging. Now special timing may be required to allow the low frequency notification appliance to awaken the occupants before you go into your voice message. Once compatibility has been established, the requirement will be that you play that low frequency alarm signal through the speaker 3 to 10 seconds before the voice message is played. The sequence should be repeated for a minimum of 3 times, and this is aligned with the requirements that are in section 34.2.1.1 of the 9th edition of UL 864. Now the other question I get is about smoke alarms. Do smoke alarms have to comply with the low frequency requirements? Now in many of these Group R1 applications, such as the transient lodging spaces, hotels and motels, you sometimes will see smoke alarms in those spaces, and they are allowed to be connected to the protected premise fire alarm system, but they are not allowed to generate a building-wide evacuation. So the reality is that the code does say that the low frequency alarms, the smoke alarms can comply with the low frequency requirements, or you can use a separate notification appliance that can comply with this requirement. As of today, I am not aware of a manufacturer that has an ANSI UL 217 low frequency smoke alarm in the market. Now, the scenario that I might walk you through is probably uncommon, but you could have a situation where you have a sleeping space where you have a smoke alarm that has a non-low frequency alarm tone, and you have a low frequency notification appliance that does comply with the low frequency tone, and they could be going off at the same time, and this is allowed. In accordance with section 29.3.9 of NFPA 72, smoke alarms that are connected to household fire alarm systems are not required to be synchronized with your notification appliance devices. Now another question that I get is about the tone differences. I want to remind you once again that the requirements are only for the sleeping spaces, and they're not intended to be throughout the building. Now when people are awake and moving about, the standard 3 kilohertz product is more than effective at waking and alerting individuals, so not awaking. So one question that we do get asked is if there's a requirement that the tones be the same throughout the building, and the answer is no. NFPA 72 does allow the difference of the tone as long as the tones within the notification zone are synchronized. The only real requirement is that you're preserving that temporal pattern because you do not want to cause confusion if they're out of sync. Okay, David, it's time for poll question number 2.
Okay, Rebecca, thank you. So we do have poll question number 2. We're just posting that now, so you'll see it in a moment. And we'll also answer a couple of questions here. We have a few in the queue. And oh, by the way, some of you have asked questions and received online answers. Rupa Short, who is our marketing leader for our Audible Visible product line, is working feverishly offline answering a bunch of those questions. So thank you for posting those, and thank you, Rupa, for answering them. So the poll question is this: when will you be required to meet the low frequency requirements? So this is looking at your area of coverage, your jurisdiction, your state. Are you being impacted now? Maybe within the next 6 months to a year, more than a year, or maybe you're in the last category that you'll unlikely ever have to be to meet this requirement for some reason. So go ahead and vote. We'd love for all of you to come back and vote on this poll question. So Rebecca, here, a couple questions that we haven't answered offline. Is there a document that discusses the ceiling mounted approval or ceiling mount approval?
Yes, so you can find that information in our manual or a data sheet, but you can also look at that UL online listing card, and it will state specifically the applications it's approved for, so whether it be indoor or outdoor, wall or ceiling mount. And in most cases, the Audible only devices, they don't have any specific mounting requirements, wall or ceiling, but the Strobe devices do.
Okay, all right, very good. Second question here, let me just pick this one out. Will we be discontinuing any products, such as mini horns, with this new requirement?
No, we will not be. So the low frequency requirements are just for the sleeping spaces. So there are still uses for the mini horns and traditional horns and horn strobes for the non-sleeping spaces. So we do not have any plans to discontinue any of our product offering.
Okay, very good. So do remember, just come back and vote. We've got 80% of you that vote. We'd love to get that even a little bit higher, so come back and vote on this poll question. Rebecca, let's take one more. Why doesn't System Sensor offer a standard Candela version within the low frequency offering?
Well, as I stated that earlier, when we were designing this product, we did a lot of customer interviews, and they felt that because the minimum Candela setting for a wall mount device is 110, that by offering the high Candela version, they can meet that as well as the ceiling mount, since we have that dual listing. So that's why we went with the high Candela offering.
Okay, all right. I'm posting the poll results here, so you can see about 50% of you online are impacted by this requirement now. So you're in the right place. You're learning about this firsthand, and it looks like the balance within, well, mostly within the next year or so, or maybe more than a year, 18%, and then 4% are indicating that they might never have to meet this requirement. So. Anyway, so let's. We've got a number of questions posted, and we'll have a spot for those towards the end of the program. So, Rupa, back to you, or Rebecca, excuse me, back to you.
That's okay. That's okay.
2 R's.
That's fine. That's fine.
All right.
So now I want to go over some key applications that are impacted and the references to the International Building Code and Fire Code. So I do know that there are some jurisdictional differences, so I want to preface the fact that I'm just going based off what these codes say, and I know that jurisdictions might make some modifications, so just be aware of what your local jurisdiction may require. So some of the key applications that are going to be impacted by the low frequency requirements are college and university dormitories, those transient lodging spaces such as hotels and motels, as well as assisted living facilities where they do not have trained staff on hand. I want to make sure that that's clear. So in essence, any place where you have patrons that are responsible and capable of evacuating the building of their own means. So one of the questions that I get is, are nursing homes required to comply? And in most cases, those places have trained staff that's responsible for those occupants, so the answer would be no. And lastly, apartments and condominiums that may have a protected premise fire alarm system or a household fire alarm system. Now, it's important to understand how changes go through the system. It really is as we call here, the hierarchy of codes and standards. It's a comprehensive system and interlinked process. Now, the building codes are really the foundation for what codes are going to get adopted per the state or per the region. So they're going to look at which editions of NFPA 72, 720, or the electrical code that they wish to adopt and enforce. Then there are, of course, the National Fire Protection Association codes, which are really, even though it's called a code, it's really more of an installation standard. And then there are, of course, the product standards, and that's where the national recognized testing labs such as UL and FM come into play, because they're ensuring that products are complying with the requirements that are used for the code. And lastly, and there's also the law. So you always have to be aware, are there any laws that are going to impact the requirements. And for notification appliances, there is the Americans Disability Act that does require that you provide means for individuals that have hearing loss or some visible impairment. And lastly, you have the HJ, who is really the gatekeeper for ensuring that they're enforcing the code requirements and making sure that the products comply with what the code is requiring. Now, I do want to make you aware that both the 2012 edition of the International Fire Code and the International Building Code require a low-frequency signal in certain group R occupancies. So looking at section 907.2 of the International Fire Code, it requires fire alarm systems in all new buildings. Remember that the basic purpose of a fire alarm system is to alert all occupants in that building, including the ones that are in the sleeping spaces. Now, in accordance with NFPA 72, they must provide occupant notification in both the common and the tenant spaces. Now, examples of the common spaces are your corridors, your lobbies, your meeting rooms, or your ballrooms that are within large hotel spaces. And your tenant spaces can be the actual sleeping rooms or the dormitory rooms in college and universities. Now, it's important to note that both the requirements in NFPA 72 and in section 907.2 do not apply retroactively to existing systems. But there are, of course, situations that, depending on the level of change that is occurring to the building, an HJ may require that the building be brought up to the latest codes. So if you are working on a project that is dealing with a retrofit application, it is important that you consult with your AHJ to see whether they're going to require you to comply with the low frequency requirements or not. Now, the 2010 edition of NFPA 72 is referenced indirectly in Chapter 80 of the 2012 edition of the International Fire Code and Chapter 35 of the 2012 edition of the International Building Code. Now, per Richard's webinar, he described in the section 18.4.5.3 in the 2010 or the 2013 edition of NFPA 72 requires a low-frequency audible notification appliance in all occupancies that are having a protected premise fire alarm system that is used to alert sleeping individuals. That means that if you are in a state or a region that is following the 2012 editions of the IBC or IFC, you may be required to comply with this requirement today, since it went into effect January 1st of this year. So I want to go into some specifics of the Group R occupancies that are impacted. So the first one is Group R1, and it states in there in section 907.2.8.1 of the International Fire Code that a low frequency requirement will be required in all sleeping spaces of hotels and motels that have a protected premise fire alarm system to activate the occupant notification system. Now, there are some exemptions that are noted in there. So the first one states that it exempts a protected premise fire alarm system if the building is less than 2 stories in height or where the individual sleeping spaces have a direct access to an open area, so such as a courtyard or the parking lot. The second exception here permits that a fire alarm system can be activated by a sprinkler system and provide occupant notification. Now the next group that I want to talk about is Group R2, which is college and universities. And in section 907.2.9.2, it describes the requirements for protected premise fire alarm systems, which once again are intended to notify all occupants within that space, including the sleeping space. So that means in those college and university dormitories, you will need to comply with the low frequency requirements. Now, the International Code Council has a really nice website that keeps up-to-date records of what states and regions are under what editions of the several international codes. If you go under iccsafe.org, under the Government Relations tab, they will direct you to another website link that has the codes and standards. And if you look at that 2012 Codes Adoption PDF, you can actually see whether your state has a whole state adoption of either the 2012 edition of the International Building Code or Fire Code, or if you might just have counties or cities that are only adopting that. Now what we have done is we've extracted that information, and as you can see here, the impact is quite wide. Just as a reminder, the code went into effect January 1st of 2014. So if you're in any one of these blue shaded states, you may be required to comply with it today. The ones in gray are in previous editions of the International Building Code or Fire Code, so they are not quite yet under the latest edition of NFPA 72. Now, we've already heard of many projects throughout the country that have already started using them. California has been very progressive. I've heard from customers in Phoenix, Arizona, and actually Ohio. We presented these products at the NFPA show last June, and we had a customer there who had an HJ who wanted him to comply with the requirements last July. So you're going to have varying effects of knowledge about the low frequency requirements and enforcement of the low frequency requirements. So I hope that you found this information valuable, because as you can see, majority of the U.S. is going to have to comply with the low frequency requirements, and I want to make you aware of as much of this information as possible. Okay, David, can we open up the webinar to some questions that maybe I missed with the content?
You bet. And go ahead and go to your slide there with your contact info as well.
Oh, sorry.
No problem. So you'll see there Rebecca's contact information plus the website, so jot that down if you need it. And I'm going to go ahead and launch our last poll question. This is really a how can we help you question, so this is completely optional. But if you've been intrigued with some of the comments today, want to find out more about the low-frequency products offered from System Sensor, we've got the first two options there. The data sheets, brochures, the online product pages. We'll be happy to send you those links. If you'd like to see the map that Rebecca referred to here, we can send you a link to that as well. Maybe you want additional training either on low frequency, the webinar that Rebecca stated that our local code expert Richard Roberts produced for us, or other AV training. We can send you some links there, or perhaps you're in a position you need to talk to someone directly, and you would like to have a System Sensor representative call you. Please click those boxes. I'll leave this up for a couple minutes. So Rebecca, we do have some questions posted here. Let me just kind of take them in the order here, and some of these have been asked a couple different ways, so let me kind of paraphrase them here. You talked about where they could hear an example of the low frequency tone. Is there actually a sound file that they can have access to, or is that kind of one and the same thing?
Yeah, the one on the website, you can just play it. It's not downloadable.
Okay.
So if you want to use that, you want to link, if you're doing training or you're just curious, you could just come to our website and play it as many times as you want.
Okay, very good. Next one here. Is the strobe still required in the ADA rooms if a 520 hertz low frequency is more effective at waking the hearing impaired? So they're contrasting there. Go ahead.
So yeah, the strobe requirements have not changed. So per ADA law, you still need to provide a means for individuals that have profound hearing loss. And I do want to point out that the studies were really focusing on those that had just mild to severe hearing loss. So it really didn't cover, that whole gamut of different level, the profound hearing loss group of individuals. So strobes are still an effective technology for those occupants.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Looks like one of our people dialing in here works for a large facility, and he's asking, will we need to replace existing mini horns with low-frequency devices, or is this just for, say, new construction or a major remodel situation?
And I think I went through that a little bit in the International Fire Code and Building Code requirements, that it's really intended for just new installations. So you don't need to go in there and start replacing out your mini horns or your horn onlys. But like I said, if you are doing a retrofit, and depending on the level of changes that you're doing, you may have a situation where an HJ may require you to bring that building up to the latest code. And if you're in a state or region that is following these requirements, you may be required to comply with the low-frequency requirements.
Okay, all right. Next one, are these required, I'm sure he means low-frequency sounders, required in ADA handicap rooms only?
Well, that really depends on what type of system you're using. So if you've got a protected premise fire alarm system, then you're following Chapter 18 requirements, which states that they're required in every sleeping room. So not only just in the ADA rooms, but every sleeping room. But if you're using a household fire alarm system, then you're following Chapter 29. And in that category, it states that they're only required in the sleeping spaces for individuals that have classified themselves as having mild to severe hearing loss, and only required if you have a law, a code, or if, let's say, a building owner wants to provide a means for such occupants.
Okay. All right. They're asking here, they have a living room adjacent to a sleeping space. So is the living room considered a sleeping space?
Well, that really is an interesting question. So if you look at the 2010 edition of NFPA 72 Handbook, it does state in there that you should consider a living room as a sleeping space. So they're not saying it has to be, but it really comes down to the definition of what are you going to define as your sleeping spaces. So if someone says, hey, you know what, I'm worried about someone falling asleep in the hallway, then you might have to be required to put a low-frequency device in that hallway. So it's really dependent on the system designer and what areas they're classifying as sleeping spaces.
Okay, all right. And this may be a version of the same question, but they're wondering if low frequency is required in non-sleeping spaces or non-sleeping rooms in very large apartments or very large hotel rooms. Same answer?
Non-sleeping rooms.
Yeah, so it's non-sleeping rooms in very like large apartments within hotels.
I'm assuming maybe they're talking about the living room area that's in some of these larger suites, which once again, as I stated, it's going to be a decision made by the designer, probably in coordination with the HJ, to see do they feel that that's an area where someone could fall asleep, and is that a sleeping space?
Okay, all right, very good. A number of people have asked for a copy of this presentation, and let me just tell you we will be offering it as a webinar archive. It'll be available on systemsensor.com under the training tab, and then click on webinars and you'll see it there as an archive. We're going to do some editing to this webinar, just cut off some of the housekeeping details, and then we'll post it. We hope to have that done by Monday. So if you want to refer to it later or have a colleague view it, they're certainly able to do that online at systemsensor.com, hopefully starting as early as Monday. So let me just keep going through. I'm going to take the poll question down after this question, so if you do want to click any of those responses, please do, and then I'll take it down and you can see the other contact information. Let me just go through some of the rest of these questions here, Rebecca. So are SpectrAlert speakers capable of producing this tone? And then his second question, which would allow the tones to be used in a voice system?
So as I stated earlier, the low frequency really is not something that we control with the speaker. It's based off the signal that you're going to be feeding through the amplifier or through the panel. So that, I stated earlier, what UL is requiring is system compatibility between the amplifier, the panel. They want to actually see what signal they want to use to meet this compatibility. So all of that is going to reside with the amplifier or panel manufacturer in their compatibility literature. So the file would have to come from them and not us. So I can't really say specifically whether our speakers will or will not until that compatibility has been established by a panel manufacturer.
Okay, very good. I'm going to take the poll question down, and you'll see the contact information that Rebecca had on our final slide as well. So we're going to answer questions up to the top of the hour. We appreciate you being with us today. Would you please clarify the difference between a coded tone and a temporal tone?
Okay, well, a temporal tone is just what we call temp 3. So that's the ANSI International Evacuation Tone for a fire alarm system. So it's a beep, beep, beep. I know you guys are going to laugh at me later, but that's what it is. A coded tone is just anything that you can create from a panel or a power supply. So there's some panels and power supplies where you can create your own patterns, and you can drive it through to the audible device to create your own patterns.
Okay.
In most cases, they may or may not be allowed for evacuation.
All right, very good. Let's see here. Why do our low-frequency sounders, or why are our low-frequency sounders not labeled with fire? They are labeled with fire in most cases, aren't they? Or are there SKUs that are not labeled?
Are the sounder only and the horn only?
Yes.
You know what? I don't know that answer. I'll have to get back to you on that because it's always been like that and it's been acceptable.
Okay, all right. We will follow up with you who answered that question. Let's see here. So let me just keep scrolling through the questions here. We've answered a couple of them. Does the code require this device to be mounted inside the bedroom, or can it be mounted outside the bedroom?
Well, the real requirement is that you, outside of just meeting the low frequency requirements, in the sleeping space you have to meet the audibility at the pillow. So it's a minimum of 75 dB at the pillow, so you really have to determine how far apart is the pillow going to be from the device to determine where you're going to mount it in order to comply with that requirement. So you really don't think you're going to meet that if you put it in the hallway.
Okay, all right. There's a couple of questions here about round products for sealing. Any product plans to produce a round product, low-frequency product?
Not at this time. As we stated before, since our products are dual listed, you can put the rectangular product on the ceiling. If we do hear more and more requests through distribution that one is requested or needed, we are more than willing to look into that.
Okay, all right. Let's see here. Just scrolling through, we've answered a bunch of these. So, sorry, let's look here. Boy, we've done a good job. Let's see. Literature in Spanish has come up here. So I'm just, it must be I guess maybe let me ask this question a different way. Is the low frequency requirement for outside the U.S. at any point, or is it a U.S. only standard, or I guess those municipalities or something that has adopted the 2010 or 2013?
And there could be situations like that, so it's probably country specific whether they're following NFPA 72 or not, and then it's what edition. So these requirements in both the 2010 and 2013 edition of NFPA 72. Okay. So if you are in a country that follows those, then I guess the answer is yes.
Okay.
You would be required to comply with the low frequency requirements.
Okay.
And if there is someone out there that is in a different country, I would love to know what country you might be required to comply.
Oh, good. So Rebecca has posted her email address there, so jot it down, and if you are dialing in from outside the U.S., that'd be great. They're asking here, when should our low-frequency devices be available within security distribution? They're in San Francisco, and they're told they're not in stock. What's going on with that?
I would check with your security distributor, or if you want to email me so I can check, because these have been available since June of last year. Okay. So it might just be a situation where someone doesn't have pricing.
Yep, maybe not, or not a stock item for that distributor yet, due to local demand. So go on and demand them.
Could be. If you can just email me, I will look into that.
Okay. Question about current draw comparisons, low frequency devices to standard devices.
Okay. They do draw more current. So if you're looking at our traditional horn-only products, you're going to see almost double the amount of current draw. But when you start comparing the low-frequency sounder strobe versus our high candela horn strobe, it's about a 30% current draw increase.
Okay, all right. Here's a question we haven't had before. They're putting the low frequency in an area that may require a cover or a cage to protect it. Are we aware of anything that's designed yet for this product in terms of a cover or cage?
I am not aware, and you'd have to check with the cage or cover manufacturer to see if they have compatibility with that, because I know that UL does govern that, because it could impact the audibility of our device.
Okay, all right. Let's see, are low frequency sounders available as addressable devices?
Not with our present products, but like I mentioned earlier, we are going to be coming out with our low-frequency series of sounder bases, and those are connected with the addressable detectors.
Okay, all right, let's see. We're almost to the end of the hour here. Let me just see if I can grab one more of these that we haven't answered yet. Inspecting. How would someone inspect or I guess certify that these are low frequency versus standard devices?
Well, the only thing that you really have to do, and that's why you will put on there, is that permanent marking on the housing. So you want to verify that you see that visible marking. You could look at the nameplate, because it should also say low frequency sounder or sounder strobe or whatever the product might be. And then you can also look on the UL listing card to verify whether it's classified as a 520 hertz low frequency device.
Okay, all right, very good. Okay, we are at the end of the hour. I do appreciate you joining us today. There's a couple questions that we didn't get to, but Rebecca will follow up with you after this. I'll give her a printout of these questions. So on behalf of System Sensor, I want to thank you for joining us today. As a follow-up, we plan to send you a brief survey in about an hour and would appreciate your help in filling that out. We plan to reward one of you that completes the survey with a $50 Amazon gift card. Rebecca, thank you for your presentation. For everyone who attended, thank you for attending. This does conclude the webinar. Please have a nice rest of the day.